always start my talks these days. I want you to now clear your minds of all you know about nutrition and food, and with an open mind, just listen. Let what I have to say float in. If you don't like it, let it float out. But let it float in and listen. Just listen, and see what happens. So that's the way I approach it these days.
Yeah, it's
Just
very, I mean, just just to try to absolutely the case. I think that's so important. Um, I think all the time about a quote from Peter Senge. He wrote this book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization. So he's talking about learning organizations and how do you keep open? How do the best organizations, and most don't do this, they have a very short lifetime, less than half our lifetime, even the Fortune 500s. How do you keep open? How do you keep open? And there's a quote in there, something to this effect: all boundaries are arbitrary. We invent them, and then ironically, we find ourselves trapped within them. It's so true. Huh? I often think too about the most, I think the best equation Einstein ever came up with. It wasn't E equals MC squared. It was ego equals 1 divided by knowledge. Ego equals 1 divided by knowledge. Isn't that the truth, though? Huh? The more you learn, I think the more humble you become, because you just start to realize the incredible complexity of whatever it is you're. And goes back to the question you said, Rob, of nutritionism and this single factor focus. I wrote a lot about that in Nourishment, a lot about the single factor focus, single nutrient focus, and how absolutely limited that becomes. One example I used was vitamin C. When people were linking vitamin C with scurvy, and they purified. When they finally got down to absolutely pure vitamin C, it had no influence whatsoever. Why? There was a cofactor that enables vitamin C to have its influence. And you can go on and on and on about that, as I did in Nourishment.
yeah, it's the complexity of what is. This is the point I make, Fred. Is that exact point that we don't understand the complex relationships between real food and the physiology and metabolism of the body. We've got no understanding, and we never will. And so we don't have to worry about it. We just feed real food, which has, based on this diversity, particularly if you can get a food that has been with the animals or whatever it is, the plants are of this diverse nature. So we're getting these terpenes, or we're getting this whole range of phytonutrients, either in the animal or directly from the plants. We don't have to worry about any of that.
That's exactly where all of our work led me. It becomes a very simple kind of, and over the years I was learning about all these phytochemicals, and it was amazing to me first to learn about the plants as a undergrad, taking plant taxonomy, and just be totally enthralled with them, and then to start to learn a little bit about them and the ways that they use these phytochemicals for their health and well-being, every facet. They were originally viewed as waste products of plant metabolism because people didn't understand. Then they saw them as secondary compounds. Well, now we know they're not secondary at all. They're absolutely essential, primary to the health of the plant, and then to our health as well. And then you start to think of when an animal eats 40 or 50 different plant species in a meal, nibbling a little bit here and there, or a human eats a really diverse meal of wholesome foods, you've introduced tens, if not hundreds of thousands of compounds into the body that are interacting with one another and cells in incredibly complex ways that we can appreciate, but you never. I'm repeating what you're saying for emphasis, but you're never going to study that. It goes beyond what reductionist science can do. We're not equipped, so it can just help to guide you, though. Huh? For me, it pointed in a direction, and then you finally say, "Okay, I think I get it. Maybe I don't, but I think I get it. And I think for herbivores, offering a diverse array of different plant species to the degree you can, having animals that know the range, that have been born and reared over generations and have genes expressed, that's how natural. And then you just think, well, that's natural system. Now, that's going back to what you say, thinking from an evolutionary and an ecological standpoint about animals in the environment and what's the ways of the natural world. And it's a beautiful thing, huh? And then it comes back to this Tao Te Ching, huh? You don't have to do anything, right? You just have to. You don't have to try to study everything, and you don't have to try to lord it over people. I mentioned that a little earlier, Rob, of you can have the authority and the dogma, huh? The dogma becomes dogma. This is, and I was just corresponding with my friend who's a medical doctor, and about some of these groups, studies, and I was saying, my wife and I, so there's no money in healthy people, right? There's no money in healthy people. You don't have to rely on the pharmaceutical industry, you don't have to rely on the medical industry, and so there's no money in that.
Exactly
There's no
right.
money in what you guys are talking beyond creating the wholesome foods, huh? Creating those kind of conditions. Yeah. But you get out of all the, boy, that's what we saw with and what the producers are seeing when animals are eating diverse arrays of foods. You're out of all the drug world, huh? You aren't in that world anymore. Why? Because they're getting that from the compounds, and which we know pharmacists, the plants were the original pharmacy, right? They were the pharmacy.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, and I just watched a wonderful podcast with Callie Means and his sister Casey, who's graduated top Stanford Medical School, and they said that there's nothing more profitable than a sick child, and because when you go from a young age all the way to adulthood, we're talking tens of millions of dollars, literally, in that whole life, potentially so the incentives are, let's just say, not exactly aligned for health, and creating a proprietary burger is much more profitable, but also a lot more controlled than thousands of ranches all over and having to herd those pesky animals that they want to move the way they want to move, and it's nature. So very interesting. Well, I feel like we could talk forever and ever. I want to ask you a quick question about what it is we do and just your feeling, because I just so respect your opinion and your expertise in your mind. So what we do at Gussy's Gut, and I know you know a bit about this, is we try to mimic nature. So we're trying to, through our fermentation, the selection of ingredients that we ferment, we're trying to optimize what a dog would experience by eating a prey animal in their gut contents. Obviously, we're making it super optimizing and clean. You're not eating in the actual gut. So we also do that with our treats. And that's why one of the things you mentioned about, letting your friends experience these steaks, we offer a trial size so people can, a lot of people have never fed fermented foods to their dogs before. And so we give them a small size that allows them to have that experience, and they can, we get these crazy notes back that people never, I didn't even know my dog would eat this, and they love it, and it's increasing their appetite or whatever. So what is your feeling? We've touched upon a lot of things. Terpenes, phytochemicals are my jam. Polyphenols, flavonols, all the phytochemicals. I think we know very little about the gut microbiome for all that we do know. And I think that what we're going to find is the unsung heroes of microbiome diversity and terrain health are phytochemicals, and getting real deep nutrition into those guts, because that's what the gut wants. And also these terpenes and all these crazy other factors that we have uncovered happens through our product. So can you tell us like a little bit about what you might believe about gut health and diversity? Like, first of all, what do you think is gut health? Can you define that for us?
You know, I love everything that you're saying, Rob, and I'm totally on board with what you're saying. I'll tell you what comes into my mind when you're talking about those kinds of things. I'm thinking as a ruminant nutritionist, and I'm thinking of all the work. The gut microbiome is really a hot topic nowadays, I'd say, right, in human nutrition and probably with the dogs and cats. But for ruminant nutritionists, it's been a hot topic for forever. When I was a young undergrad, it's like all they talked about was the rumen and its microbes. It's like there's nothing else attached. All it is. And if you put them on a high grain diet, you switch them over to starch digesting bacteria. If you put them on a roughage diet, you're going to have cellulolytic bacteria and stuff. But yeah. I also think that so people were paying attention to that a lot in ruminant nutrition, and they knew that it takes time for the gut microbiome to change when you change diet. As you change diet, it's going to take time for they used to talk a week to 10 days to 2 weeks when you're changing animals, and you do it gradually so that you don't make the animals sick. But I think about some of the work that was done on phytochemicals years ago, and I think of a guy named Dan Jansen who did just incredible ecological work. But he was looking at the rumen and its microbes, and what they were showing is that when animals are eating diverse arrays of different plant species, what happens to the gut microbiome? I don't even have to tell you, it gets very diverse, right? You create all these diverse populations. Same thing's been shown with humans, right? Some of the indigenous folks that are still eating really, really diverse diets, they've got incredibly diverse microbiome. So that's what I think about a lot. And I often think about probiotics. Be interesting what you guys think. Sometimes people pop those, again, more like the nutrient approach.
Yep.
But what I think is, the diet is what's going to so determine what's the diet that those animals are on. That's the substrate that they're going to be eating, right? And maybe if you pop a probiotic, it may or may not do anything, but the diet is what's going to determine that. Yeah. I'll give you one other thing that I find fascinating about that, that ruminant nutritionists were figuring out. And there's a story here. There's a plant called halogeton that grows in the salt deserts of Utah and any of the salt deserts. It's a low-growing form, very succulent. It just looks like you'd want to eat it yourself. It's so succulent and stuff. Well, it's loaded with oxalates. And one of the classic stories in poisonous plants literature is when people moved, I think, 1,000 head of sheep. They moved them from a familiar environment, moved them hundreds of miles into this landscape that had a lot of halogeton. The sheep were hungry. They were in a new environment. They didn't know the plants. They got off the truck and they ate some of the halogeton, ended up dead. 1,000 sheep. You can imagine the pictures of what that looks like. If they'd have allowed those sheep to gradually come onto that plant, if they hadn't starved them onto it, not a one would have died. Why? Because there's bacteria in the rumen that can degrade those oxalates. And that was shown in a PhD dissertation after all of that occurred. But one of the things that we found over and over again, so what's mother doing? Starting in utero and early in life, mother's milk, mother's starting to familiarize that fetus. The fetal taste system's fully functional during the last trimester of gestation. Foods in mom's diets are getting in, the flavors of those are getting into the amniotic fluid. The young creature is already, and we have studies that show that. So you're already starting to learn about what's out there. Then in her milk, those flavors are getting in there. Then when they start to forage, mother's a model. So what she's doing is helping those animals, young animals, to make the transition to a new environment, right? What we were seeing at the Poisonous Plants Lab is that when you had managers that didn't know landscapes and didn't know the animals, they would make mistakes and get their animals poisoned because they were putting them in situations that the animals weren't familiar with. So let me backtrack. What's the key here then is the young animals will sample foods that they've never seen before. They'll sample foods that mom's not eating, but they eat very little the first day, a little bit more the second, a little more the third, a little more the fourth. If they experience illness when they've eaten a meal with one novel food in it, the next day they avoid the novel food, not the familiar foods. It's so cool how all that stuff works, but it's so adaptive too, right?
Yeah.
Mom is a transgenerational link, but the young animals can bring new information into the group because they are sampling things, but they're doing it from that familiar base. When you throw them into a totally unfamiliar environment, you've broken all those linkages, you end up with problems. And I could tell you on and on and on stories about the kinds of problems that people got into when the ranchers didn't know the range, right? The old man I worked for, Henry DeLuca, he knew the range and he knew the animals in those range, and he wouldn't make those mistakes. I used to ask him, Henry, why don't you buy replacement animals and bring them in? You know, I was learning about heterosis in college, and he said the basic problem is, and he told me examples. He said the basic problem is the animals just don't know the range. He said, I've brought animals in that other animals into my herd, replacement heifers. He said, you know, these big landscapes where we run the animals and we move them with horseback throughout the summer. He said, if you bring animals in that don't know the range, you don't know if you're going to find them. You don't know where you're going to find them. They're not going to be bred. They're going to be in poor condition. He summed the whole thing up. The basic problem, the animals just don't know the range. So again, it's really kind of basic, simple things. But if we get too reductionist in our ways and too lost in the weeds, then we can't see the forest for the trees, right? I mean, it's another way of saying some of the things that you guys are saying, and you miss this kind of bigger thing that's not so complicated in one way. If you just, as you've been saying, Ian, and you've been reinforcing, Rob, if you think from more of an evolutionary ecological standpoint of try to put yourself in the place of those animals and what is it that they evolved doing and so forth. It's not so. It's true what you say. It's not so complex. I think too. You can cut all this stuff, but I go into infinite. I think of all the times I used to hunt in Colorado. I love to hunt deer and elk, and so you shoot an elk and you quarter it, and you leave some of the entrails and stuff, and you come back and look the next day, that's all gone, right? It's all been eaten. I mean, it's all been eaten, and even some of the rumen contents. And you think, well, that's the coyotes did that, and you think, boy, they really appreciated all of that, right? And that's what you guys are talking about. And so I'm just trying to relate it back and say I have the personal experience of seeing that from all the times I like to hunt, my wife and I, and then just seeing going back to those places where you killed an animal and seeing what the animals had done with what was left. That was delicacy for those animals, huh? They ate it all. And you'll see stories like that in Nourishment. If you read the book, you'll see stories of like
I will be getting that, Fred. I have to get it now that I know about it.
Well, you could tell that Fred is a absolute pro and has spoken at, I mean, it's just hundreds of talks because he brought the whole thing back to the beginning story of working on that farm, and more importantly, his book. This is a pro here who's done many talks. So we appreciate that. This has been a really just such a pleasure. I hope that we can do this again and maybe hit a different angle on a similar topic. I don't feel like we've honestly even really touched a lot of your brilliance and what you have in your book and your papers. And, you're a person that's, we didn't go a lot into your bio, but it's an impressive bio of, you're mentoring graduate students at great numbers. You've done a lot of talks and published a lot of amazing papers. So being with you today has been great.
Indeed.
Well, I've got to tell you guys, I was wondering prior to this, because we didn't, sometimes people will give you a bunch of questions that they want to cover and stuff, and I'm happy either way. I just feel like I just speak from the heart and can go into infinite digress. But so I didn't know what to expect, actually. I didn't know what to expect today, but I've got to tell you, and I'm not making this up to be nice or anything else. It's been an incredible pleasure to be with you guys and to hear. My wife will absolutely love everything that you guys were talking about related to pets and so forth, because that's her mantra so much. And she'll oftentimes just come back from the vets really really a bit frustrated, let's say, related to some of these issues, because and they don't listen to her, right? And when I go, I don't speak up and say, they don't even know I wrote a book or anything. I just it's not my way to do that. But she'll be so frustrated. Sometimes I will speak up a bit, but not from trying to say who you are.
Everybody,
but they don't. They don't give you credibility, huh? That's what really bothers my wife, is that you don't get, at least with some of the ones that we've interacted on occasion. You don't get any kind of credibility, which is very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I will. I know you're headed down towards my neck of the woods. I'd love to meet you and your wife and Henry, if we get a chance for a coffee or anything. And I will hook you into a world of vets that you could do from a Zoom call that your wife will love, and will support you and give your wife, her due, because that's it. That's a real problem that a lot of people have.
Oh, absolutely. And she's totally on the same page, for obvious reasons. You start thinking a certain way, it doesn't matter what the creature is, you're going to think that way about it, right? As we've been saying. Rob, it would be fun to stop and see you. This isn't but we'll be coming down that way, and we're going to stop in Lakewood to see an old friend from the ranch days, an 89-year-old, she'll be 90. Going to stop and see her. She was a daughter of the rancher that I worked for, that were like parents to us. Henry and Rose were like parents to Sue and I when we were young, and we're very, very close. It would be fun to stop and just say hi to you. I would love that. And to get some of that fermented, because to get some of that fermented product of yours, that would be pretty neat. So I'm thinking if we could text with one another or something, if it could work, it would be fun to stop and see you. Ian, where are you?
I'm in Australia, in New South Wales.
Oh, fabulous. We spent a year in Armadale. We lived in
really?
1992. Sue and I and our two young kids at that time, we lived there for a year. Oh, we absolutely love. I've been back there so many times, done so many workshops and so many talks across Australia over the years.
You might have seen more of Australia than I have.
Oh, I'm telling we did a lot of cool research when we were there, and one was with a veterinarian, Justin Lynch. We did some of our anesthesia studies there too, where we put animals in deep anesthesia during the time that feedback was occurring, and showed that they still acquired an aversion to the food even in deep anesthesia. We did tons of studies, but boy, did we ever travel a lot too. Every time we weren't studying, we were traveling around looking at all. It's an amazing continent. It's absolutely amazing place. It was fabulous. So where are you there?
Well, we're a little town called Berry, which is south of Sydney, on the east coast of New South Wales.
Absolutely.
So it's a coastal town.
Absolutely no. In fact, at Christmas time that we were there that year, it didn't feel like Christmas to us at all, right? No snow, no. So we took off and we headed south, and we went down, from Armadale south down through Sydney and down to the Three Sisters. You know where the Three Sisters are?
Yes, Katoomba, yes.
We traveled down. you're bringing back so many wonderful men. I still am in contact with a lot of. I just did a podcast. I just gave a podcast with a lady in Australia in June, maybe it was, or May, and just did a talk for her group there on plant diversity, the importance of plant diversity for nutrition. Kate Torrent, yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, it's wonderful that you're still doing all this, and I think this media of Zoom and all that we can do now via the internet is absolutely brilliant. We don't have to travel, because I'm a bit like you. My wife and I prefer not to travel these days.
It is wonderful, and it absolutely is, and yeah, we're in the same boat exactly, huh? I traveled so much and loved it, but just to reach a point where it's like, oh, it's just, it gets too much, huh? It gets too much, all the travel.
Well, they've taken the fun out of travel, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Honestly, Rob, it has. It's a kind of a drudgery, and so boy, thank goodness for Zoom, huh? On these different platforms that are out there nowadays that allow us to do these kind of things, huh? Have wonderful kind of conversations and so forth.
Well, Fred,
and meet people you were never going to meet. It's like yourself. It's brilliant. I love it.
Oh, me too. Yeah. And it was nothing but a joy for me, I'm telling you, to spend time with both of you. I'm not saying that to be nice. I just want you to know, and to see kindred spirits that are working in parallel paths, but in different worlds in one sense, in a sense.
Absolutely. That's the way it is.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. It's heartwarming for me to see that. So it's been a surprise. I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't.
Fred, my friend Joel is really smart guy, and he has a saying I love. He says, "Hearts speak to hearts." And I feel like that's what's happened here. So we've had a lot of brain power, to be sure, but I think we connected on a good level. So thank you for being with us today, Fred.
And it is the heart level, huh? That's where you have to connect. This doesn't matter. Yeah, well, thanks you guys a bunch. Hey, Rob, do you mind if I text you?
No, I think we've already been texting. So text. I'll text.
Okay,
you right now.
That's true. We have. I'm not even thinking. Yes.
Yeah, I'll text you right now.
If we can work it out, I would love to stop and just say hi to you. Let Sue meet you. You could meet Henry, the crazy still puppy lab, and that would be neat. So we'll see if we can do that.
All right, you got a deal. Everybody, thanks for watching and listening. If you're listening on the podcast, Fred, do you have a website you want people to go to? Anybody can visit? Where can people see your body of work? Like, where's a good place?
There used to be a website called behave.net, but I think, I've been retired for 15 years now, Rob, 15 years. And so once I left, there was a lady who did outreach, but she's retired now. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying I don't think there is a good place probably now to go.
But I can tell you, Fred, of the people out there, if you Google Fred Provenza, you will get it. Provenza, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Haven't had a drink in. I haven't even had a drink. But Google Professor Fred Provenza, you will get so much, and it's so brilliant what you'll get, and you're going to enjoy it. Let me tell you.
Yeah, there's a lot of work out there by just Googling your name. Thanks again, Fred. I look forward to meeting you myself, and maybe we'll do another show sometime. And by the way, thanks to Jane Buxton for introducing us. Another special human being, and really appreciate that connection she made. Thank you, Jane.
Yes, I'm going to have to send her a note. I was thinking that too, that I'm going to send her a note and tell her that we finally got together. She'll be happy about that, I'm sure.
Another kindred spirit. Thanks, everybody, and thank you very much, Fred. Take care.
Okay, you guys, take care.